Hi, so today I want to discuss the subject of abortion as it relates to antinatalism. So, antinatalism, of course, is the view that we should not start conscious lives. It is not, however, the view that we should end conscious lives. And this is a very important distinction, especially in the context of this discussion. Well, I think in any discussion about abortion, it's important to distinguish different stages of fetal development at which an abortion is being considered. So, first trimester abortions, this is 0 to 13 weeks. These involve, if the science on this is correct, an entity that is not yet conscious. On the other hand, if we're considering late, let's say third trimester abortions, we have reason to believe these involve ending the life of a conscious entity, not only conscious but with the capacity to feel pain and discomfort. In these latter cases, one would have to admit, I think, that abortion is not simply a question of choice. Now, I want to be clear that this is not to say necessarily that the interests of the fetus will, even at this later stage, override the interests of the woman. Only that there is a difference in the way we assess the morality of early abortions versus late-term abortions. And really, when we consider the fact that most women who terminate their pregnancy have very serious reasons for doing so, I think it's probably reasonable to say that even late-term abortions are very often, if not always, ethically justified. But here I want to focus on first trimester abortions, not only because these admit of clearer answers ethically, I think, but also because these constitute the great majority of abortions. In fact, almost 90%, I think. Now, assuming that the fetus is not a conscious entity at this early stage, antinatalism would, I think, more or less imply that first trimester abortions are not only morally permissible, but morally preferable. First trimester abortions prevent conscious beings from coming into existence. And this is precisely what is prescribed by antinatalism. And so this position is, strictly speaking, pro-abortion, at least up until the fetus becomes conscious. And this is essentially what David Benatar has called the pro-death view. Of course, there have been various objections even to first trimester abortions, and maybe the most common of these has to do with the potential for the early fetus to become a person, or in other words, a being with interests of some kind and a right to life. So the claim is that this potential of the fetus makes it wrong to prevent it from becoming a person. There's an interesting argument against this sort of view we find in Michael Tooley's essay, Abortion and Infanticide. So in this piece, Tooley asks us to imagine a certain chemical, which when injected into the brain of a kitten, gives the kitten human-like cognition, and then proceeds to make an argument on the basis of this thought experiment. But I want to slightly change this thought experiment because I think the assumption that's made that kittens don't have a right to life is highly debatable, right? So suppose that humans in the future invent a simple device that you can just plug into your computer that will make the computer fully conscious with interests, preferences, and presumably a right to life. And imagine we had easy access to such a device and knowledge of it. Well, wouldn't we have to say that every computer would then have the potential to become a person? But notice that nothing about the computer has changed except this sort of metaphysical property, if you like, about what it can potentially be. But if potential is significant in the way people claim that it is, it seems to me that we would be committed to saying that it would be wrong in this hypothetical situation to break a computer or to choose not to plug in this special device. But the question, of course, is do we really think this would be wrong? Now, many people will say that these cases are dissimilar in that one involves actively preventing, in this case the fetus, from becoming a person, while the other involves doing so passively by not plugging in the crucial device. This is the famous but also highly contested moral distinction between acts and omissions. Well, to address this point, Tooley makes the additional claim that there is no morally significant difference between actively preventing an entity from becoming a person and doing so passively. These are morally symmetrical, if you like. I mean, after all, is there really a moral difference between knowingly withholding something necessary for an entity to be a person and actively ending the life of a potential person? Are these not equally to prevent an entity from becoming a person? Well, some have also suggested that killing an early embryo or unconscious fetus is ethically similar to killing a person in a coma, presumably because a person in a coma has, like a fetus, only the potential to come out of their state of unconsciousness. And since we do not think that killing a person in a coma is acceptable, we should be equally opposed to the killing of an unconscious fetus. But there is, however, a difference, and I think an important difference, between these two situations. And that is, of course, that the person in the coma has desires and interests that are simply dormant, whereas the fetus has desires or interests that are only potential. So, in effect, by ending the life of the patient or the person in the conscious state, we terminate a life already in progress. And that seems to me significantly different from not starting a life. But leaving these sorts of questions aside, I think antinatalism, plus all the assumptions we made about the fetus at the early stages of development, implies that we should be pro-abortion for at least during the first trimester, or before the fetus is in fact conscious. But it does seem to me that antinatalism would not alone imply a pro-abortion stance on late-term abortions, or ones that involve a conscious fetus. So that is all I have for now, and thanks again for listening.